Ready? All right, good evening. It's good to be back in the Lord's house on this Wednesday. If we all will, grab a red church hymnal, turn to page 127. Let's all stand and we'll sing How Firm a Foundation. How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in His excellent word. What more can He say than to you He hath said, ye who unto Jesus for refuge have fled, in every condition, in sickness and health, in poverty's bed, or abounding in wealth, at home or abroad, on the land, on the sea, as thy days may depend, will thy strength ever be. Fear not, I am with thee, oh, be not dismayed. I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by thy righteous omnipotent hand. That soul that on Jesus doth lean for repose, I will not desert to his foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no, never forsake. All right, page 391. Oh, how I love Jesus. Page 391. Alas, and did my Savior bleed, and did my sovereign die? Would He devote that sacred head for such a worm as I? Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because He first loved me. Was it for crimes that I had done, He groaned upon the tree? Amazing pity, grace unknown, and love beyond degree. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, depths of grief can ne'er repay the debt of love I owe. Here, Lord, I give myself away. 'Tis all that I can do. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because He first loved me.
All right, you can be seated. Good to be here this evening. Glad that each one of you are here tonight. And just give the Lord praise and thanks for what He's done for us these past few weeks. Had a great day here Sunday, and certainly just still rejoicing in the services that we had. And do want to ask that you pray for several. Brother Dennis Lehman was able to go home. He's doing somewhat better. Sister Betty Lefew, still pray for her. I haven't spoke to her in several days, but she is home from the hospital and has been for a week or so now. And do remember the family of my good friend, Bill Forster. Bill Forster passed away on Monday, I think it was, when Brenda, Monday. And I was able to go see him late Sunday night in the hospital. They had, I think it's Sunday night, they did surgery on Saturday, that's right. And they had to, he had a lot of infection in his stomach. They had to put on the colostomy bag, and they wasn't expecting that. And Bill was really weak. His blood pressure for the last several days before he passed was, I think, 80/30, just really low. And he always said two words that Bill would always say. We said a lot of things, but two words especially. Bill would always say, "Surely not." And he was really weak. But I was in the hospital, and it's been a while since I've got to see Bill. And so I went in, and he really brightened up when I went into the room. And I began to tell him just about how much I appreciated him and how much I thought of him. And I told him, I said, "Bill," I said, "you've been one of my best friends." And he was weak, but he said, "Surely not." And that done my heart good to hear that, but surely not. That's what he said. And I said, "Well, you really have, Bill." I said, "Is it okay if I pray with you?" And he nodded his head yes. And then I asked him, could I come back the next day? And I said, "I'll wait till in the evening to let your family visit with you, and that way I won't keep anybody from coming in." And I said, "You want me to come back and I'll pray with you?" And he shook his head yes. And I was getting in the shower, just had finished getting ready, and Lisa had tried to call me. Of course, I was in the shower, and got out and called her, and she said he passed away, and he was not even conscious all day yesterday or Monday. And so just really pray. Bill always said he did not want to have a service. And I've laughed and I've cried, but things that he said and done. But I'll never forget the very first time that I ever met Bill. His mother was sick, and I had came here to the church in '87, and I think it was April the 3rd of '88 that Bertha passed away. April the 3rd, 1988. She is the first funeral that I had here at Liberty. And she was in the hospital and didn't really get to come to church the time that I pastored here because of her sickness. And I would go visit her. And there were several of those girls, Shirley, Natoma, Pokey, Pinky, Jean, several of them. And Shirley. And Bill would be there. And for honestly, I thought he was one of the sisters. Bill had real long hair, And he just was quiet, never said anything. And so one day I was down there and he spoke up, and I thought, and realized it was a man. And so I went back another time and I invited him to church. And somehow he got talking about that old big LTD I had. I got it from Roy Goodson. It was as long as a school bus, had nearly. And he wanted to ride around with me that day. And I was scared to death about taking him. I told Brenda, I said, that man's wanting to ride around with me. And I said, I'm afraid that people's going to think I've got a woman with me. And Brenda said, well, it won't matter. I said, no, it's bothering me. I said, they're going to think it's an ugly woman. And so Bill rode with me, and I'll never forget. We went up to the barber shop that Michael owns now, and it was across the street from where it is, up just in front of the triangle where Carol Ann was. And Hooney and Gabe were always the regulars. Sometimes Rex Walls would be cutting hair. And I went in there and Hooney cut my hair, and there was one other man in there. And Bill wasn't even going to go in. He just didn't go in places. And he was going to sit in the car. And I said, well, y'all just come in. Don't look like too many's here. So he came in, and after the man got out of Gabe's chair, Hooney was cutting mine, and Bill walked up there, and Gabe said, can I help you? He said, yeah, I want a haircut. So he sat down in the chair, and he had never met Bill, and first time he'd ever been anywhere with me. And they asked him, so how do you want it? How do you want it cut? Because it's long. And he said, just cut it like his, pointed at me. And he wore it that way up until a few years ago, and he started getting a flat top. And I asked him if he liked it better, and he said no. He said, but it was cheaper. They didn't have to pay anything at the barber shop. His brother was able to cut it for him for free. And so Natoma brother cut it. But Bill joined the church here on March the 26th of 1989. And I baptized Bill just shortly after that when the weather got warmer. And he had run around with me for years. And then 9 years, Bill never worked much of a job, but he got a job at the pilot station, and he worked midnights, and he got where he couldn't come to church. And after Natoma's husband died, she said, Bill came over here, said he had a bag of clothes, and she said, that's been, I think at that time it's been 12 years ago. She says he never left yet. He just moved in, and that's where he lived. But he was 75, and he didn't want a service, so no funeral. But do pray. He stayed with Lisa. Lisa took care of him there after Natoma passed away. And he really thought a lot of Lisa and her husband Travis and their 3 children. And I know it's very difficult on them and been difficult on us. Somebody had mentioned today, said this has been a tough year for you. And I really never thought of it, but I lost my mother and lost Natoma, was a good friend, lost Bill, and then the devastation that took place with our family back on Valentine's Day. But through it all, I'll tell you, God's still good to us, and I appreciate Him tonight. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Psalms, I'll give the chapter in just a moment. And it's been a different week for us. Last week we had 2 funerals and had I think it was 8 people on a couple of days in the hospital, 7 the other days, and of course 3 counting April. Never got to see April climb. I went to the hospital to see her. They moved her, and my friend Tom McFarland, Judge McFarland, his dad was at UT. Didn't get to see him, but prayed for him. His mother had surgery at Rome Medical, and of course I've lost all my implants and screws that broke again. I go the 14th to get that, so talking's a little difficult for me right now, and it will be until I get this fixed. So probably about a week or so after the 14th, maybe they can get it taken care of. But in the midst of all the things, and I preached there Sunday morning, as though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. And then the latter part of that verse, Job made a foolish statement. He talked about how that he was just going to sustain himself before God, and instead of the judgment of his friends, he'd just go in and let God judge him. But he was telling the Lord that he was just going to maintain, and pretty much was saying, I'm going to maintain my innocence. And the thing about God, no matter who you are, everyone's guilty before God. God's perfect, but Job sure taught us a lot of things. And I didn't give you a prayer request, but I did kind of give those throughout the message. And there's a few other things that I didn't even mention. I had a man that was really heartbroken last week in the midst of all of that was going on. He has a granddaughter, and 16 years old. She was raped. And of course, I won't mention the name, but that's really been on my heart. And I'm not sure, they I think know who did it, but don't know if there's been any arrest made. But we live in a world where there's troubles all around us, and we need a God, and I'm glad we have one. You've been watching the news, you've been seeing all of the devastation and all the troubles, and I think I come back Sunday night and had mentioned the church in Asheville that was doing such a phenomenal job giving out the supplies, and we weren't allowed to take pictures to post because of one of the larger groups was kind of a threat that maybe they would stop the church's work. And they came in, and I was telling you Sunday night that they had asked, where did all this come from? Pastor said, God's people. That was a good answer. And said, who paid for it? He said, God provided it. And the next morning, that organization came back in and complimented them and is actually working with them now, giving them National Guard and everything else. So God certainly had worked that out. And since we had we took more of the money. We had a little bit of money left, and we were able to help some others buy some, I think it's gloves, boots, mainly boots, and things that were needed for the search and rescue teams that were searching, doing cleanup, just helping, and they didn't have the right attire for the situation. Now that the waters had receded, most of these people in all these areas are working where there's sewage, raw sewage, septic tanks that have come up out of the ground, and they didn't have the right equipment. And Sister Shannon was able to find a good price for the equipment they needed, and Amazon was able to get it to us quickly, and even Sunday, and let them come to the post office and pick it up. And that was delivered, and then on Monday, I think it's Monday, some more items were ordered of the same to take. And then you've been seeing on the news, our Roane County Road Superintendent is there this week in Johnson City. In fact, they were up in Mountain City where our friend Leonard Fletcher pastors at Dyson Grove. And he didn't meet Leonard, but he said, I sat in the church parking lot with the road superintendent there, but Roane County's got a crew and helping maintain some roads or build some roads or restore them. And a lot of people, Brother Ernie Peters, asked that anybody would help. He and Debbie are doing a ministry. I think it's gloves, and I'm not sure all of the items, but I'm sure they'll have a list maybe on Facebook if you'd like to help with that. Kevin from down at Ace dropped off a paper. I don't have it up here. But now they're needing, it was much cooler, 6 degrees cooler this morning in those areas than it is here. And so they're taking up sweaters, socks, long johns, coats, things like that. The Church of Christ at the end of Longville will be taking it. And if you have anything like that, you drop it off down there, and they'll take care of it. You say, well, preacher, that's not a Baptist church. Well, what I tell people is this. The people that brought us money, and I got more today, $300 check today, for this relief in case we do another phase. And I said, when people bring money for this, I'm not asking them, are you a Republican or Democrat, Baptist or Methodist, or are you a Christian or are you a sinner? I said, but it's people that's trying to help people. And that's what we're doing. And you can't never go wrong pouring out your heart and trying to help. And we did all this in North Carolina. Some's mentioning, can we do something maybe in a different area this next time? So we'll see what everybody wants to do. And we'll just keep doing and keep helping. One good thing about doing what we're doing in North Carolina is we've got several connections with pastors that we really, really know and have confidence in them. And we know that they're getting the items. In fact, using side-by-sides, they're at Asheville Trinity, they're using helicopters, taking things in. And you think, well, they got so much, and people still bringing, but you'd be surprised how much it takes. But the next phase will need to change items. They'll be needing things for where they got some houses to live in, and so you be praying about that. All right, Psalms chapter number 13. We'll look here in the Word of God, and I'd told Brenda, I said, I wish I could just do something different this week, and boy, have I ever done something different this week. Brenda's sister's house burnt down several weeks ago. They weren't living in it. It's an old farmhouse built in the 1800s, I think. And I've got Daddy's old truck that he holds scrap metal in. And Darrell had asked me, he said, do you fool that old scrap metal? I said, I haven't in a long time, but when I do, it makes me think of Dad. And I've thought of Dad a lot. And the biggest thing I thought of is, why in the world did you do this? And it had a metal roof on it. And I have worked, and I have worked and worked. And all by myself. I worked, of course, didn't ask for no help. And the sad part was when you took all the scrap metal off, and when you see what you got for it, it's not good. But I told Brenda yesterday, I said, Brenda, I've done something terrible. The only building that didn't get burnt was the garage. And I was trying to back that truck and trailer up, an old gravel driveway. It kind of had an elevation to it, and it just kept spinning. So boy, I got me a good shot. I'm not good at backing a trailer, but I was straight, and I went right through the garage door. And so for the $300 or so I made, it's probably about a $3,000 garage door. So things worked out pretty good, I guess. Amen. All right, if you're glad to save, say a good amen. I hope your week's been as good as mine. Let me mention this one thing. I went by a little while ago, come home, got a shower, and went over to see Aunt Marcella. And folks, if I've ever seen God work a miracle other than salvation in people's lives, it would have to be with my Aunt Marcella. Marcella was sent to go home. Said she'd have 1 week to live, and got everything set up. She wasn't able to talk, and she went home. I forget which day that was, and went over there. I think it was Saturday. Took some food and ran into Kilman K and different ones, and they were taking some food. Several was there, and I think it was that night or maybe the night before. I can't remember. I was over and we were in there. Well, it was Friday. I had a funeral, and some friends from Indiana had come by to see her, and I went in and no response whatsoever. We went out to the truck. My cousin went out to say goodbye as I was going to the truck, and one of them come out with a cell phone and said, "Hey, y'all might want to come back in." I said, "Why's that? Is it bad?" Said, "No." Said, "Since you all came outside," said, "you and Jerry had prayer with her." Said, "She's eating a creamsicle." Thought, no way. Went in, she's eating a creamsicle and barely could talk. And went over there a few days ago, and they had her sitting out on the porch. And I went, and she's able to talk, and she can't keep a thought real clear. But today, her daughter from Texas took her out, and they went to Mimi's to eat. She can only take about 2 steps, and the rest Bethany has to do for her. And I went by and I said, Aunt Marcella, where'd you go today? She said, somewhere. And I said, well, where was it? And I named off everything but that. And then later we found out it was there. But she's just sitting out on the porch, 90 years old. And every day she's gaining strength and doing better. And I can't explain it. I just have to say, but God. And so thank you for praying for her. If you want to go by and visit with her, I'm sure she'd love to have a visit. They're telling people try to visit between 9 and 5. 9 and 5 makes it a little bit easier. All right. In Psalms chapter 13, I'm going to begin reading in verse 1. And probably read the whole chapter. It's just a short chapter. But there's some things here that may be beneficial to you tonight. And sometimes we all have questions. I know I do. And I don't always have the answers. I don't ever mean to question God. But in reality, sometimes we do. We just don't understand. His ways are way above ours, and sometimes past finding out. But here the psalmist, he begins to pray because he needs some help. There are some enemies in his life, and these enemies have came and they have hurt and done pain and caused problems in David's life. And it says in verse number 1, he said, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever. How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? And I want you to listen to what David's saying. He's troubled. He's having issues in his life, and he don't feel like that there's any help for him. He don't think that nothing's working in his favor. It just doesn't seem like that nothing good's taking place. So he said, how long wilt thou forget me? He even come to the place where he felt like that God had forgotten him. And I want to ask you something. I want you to answer it out loud. But I'm sure. But have you ever been there in your own life? If it wasn't even for you, but maybe someone that you cared for and that you loved and you were seeking God for. I know Sunday I went by to visit Pam's dad, mom, Brother Don, and sister Nora, and he was on the couch resting, and I wasn't able to hear very well, and he talked soft, and we ended up going outside, and we sat there, and Brother Don began to show me and talk about fishing, and boy, the water was just as muddy as it could be from all that mud that's finally come over the dams, and wasn't as pretty as it usually is. And Brother Don was talking about that. Then he was just stayed busy. Somebody else came and went outside with them, and then I left. And then Brother Don had appointments today, and sometimes, you know, we even wonder, what's God going to do? You're going to help us? You're going to realize the situation we're in? And one thing I can say is, Brother Don said to me on Sunday, he said, the Lord's good to us. And that's exactly right. No matter what we're going through or how far it seems that we are, maybe in a cave somewhere, but he said the Lord's good to us, and he always is, and he always will be. But David, in the Scriptures, he said, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord, forever? And he began to say, it seems like that you're never going to remember me, and this time or space that I've been so isolated, he said, it seemed like it's going to be for an eternity. So he comes to tell us in verse 1, he said, how long wilt thou hide thy face from me? So not only did he feel like that God had forgotten him, but he felt like the Lord was even hiding his face from him. Sometimes, you know, if you can't touch someone, but you can at least see their face, it brings some comfort. And David felt like not only has God forgotten about him, but he won't even let him see his face. He said, how long are you going to hide your face from me? And then in verse 2 he said, how long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? And how long shall mine enemy be exalted over me. Now, if you notice, not much so far has been a statement, but there's been several questions that he's asked. And the one that he's repeating over and over in 2 verses is simply, how long? And if you look at them closely, how long will you forget me? And then he says, how long will you hide your face from me? And then he said, how long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow? And then he said, how long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? So 4 times that he's asking God, how long? How long? In other words, I think David is saying, I've had enough. I just can't take much more of the isolation, and not only being isolated and being forgotten about, but on top of all of that, the enemy is being exalted higher than I. And if you ever want to put salt on a wound, you let the enemy begin to be exalted above what you are, and you'll find out how that feels. So he comes to tell us in verse 3, he said, consider and hear me, O Lord my God, lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. And then in verse 4, he said, lest mine enemy say, I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. But I have trusted in thy mercy, my heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. Now, we're getting down to verse number 5 and finally verse 6, and it seemed like that David's getting himself in a little better spirit. He's saying it in verse number 5, but I've trusted in the mercy, and my heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. No matter how dark it was and how dissatisfied and disheartening David was, he said, I'm still going to rejoice in salvation. But then he comes to verse 6, and he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. He said, not only am I going to trust in the mercy of the Lord, as he said in verse 5, and not only is my heart going to rejoice in salvation, but he says, when I've trusted and when I've rejoiced, he said something different happens. And here's what he said. In verse 6, he said, I will sing unto the Lord, because he hath dealt bountifully with me. Now, when you look at these first 4 verses, you see nothing but complaint. You see nothing but question, and you see nothing but dissatisfaction as David is pouring his heart out to God. But you've got to understand this. He didn't just completely quit. He didn't give up. But I'll tell you what, he began to talk about how that he's going to trust in the mercy of God. He's going to rejoice with his heart of salvation. And then finally, he said that he's going to sing a song unto the Lord. He said, I'm going to sing that song because the Lord hath dealt bountifully with me. Now, I want to give you 3 things tonight, and we'll be finished with this chapter. But I want you to notice that if you look at this and break it down, maybe in 3 sections, the first thing you find is sorrow. The second thing you'll find is supplication. And then finally, you see a song. That's why we know that in Psalms 30 and verse 5, he cried out way before this chapter, or after this chapter rather, and he said, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. And I believe that David understood that. He knew what it was to weep. And we don't know if there's any tears in chapter 13, but we do know this, that if they're not there, he's welling them up. Tears are about to come forth. And when he gets to chapter 30, he said, weeping may endure for a night. So he's went through so much that not only is he having the sorrow but it's turned into tears. And finally, those tears came weeping. Weeping endureth for a night, but he realized that God gives joy in the morning. Now, let's look at verses 1 and 2. And I've read them thoroughly, and I've read verse 1 twice, and we've touched a few things on each verse. But I want you to look at the sorrow. And notice this. You can look and say, preacher, what would you title this? I guess I'd title it, How Long? How long? How long? And then how long? Even though there's 3 divisions that I'm going to share tonight, there were 4 times that David asked the question, how long? 4 times in the first 2 verses. After that, he's not mentioned the question of how long, but he does begin to get himself out of that dark place that he's in. You know what? If you get in that place in your life, you better be careful because if you're not careful, there may not be anyone else that's going to help you get out of it. It may take you reminiscing over what God's done for you in the past. I know the other night when I went over to see Bill, and most everyone here knows that we have been friends for a long time. I have aggravated that man to no end. And you said, preacher, you regret that? He enjoyed it, most of it. But I thought about, as I left the hospital, and I thought about now, I was aggravated because all them months that I didn't get to be around and didn't see him, I took him to all of his appointments before that, and doctors and medicines. I was fixing his medicine, and then for several months, nothing. And I was getting bitter about that. But then I started thinking about things and times and opportunities and times that he would make me laugh. And I'll never forget the time that he and Natoma, we had a crowd that Sunday morning, and Bill was sitting back there. Me and Brenda, Bill and Natoma had been up, I think it was around Jamestown, Clark Range, in that area. And I said we just passed farm after farm, and I mentioned these horses that we saw. And I said, Bill kept on and on, wanting to ride a horse. And we said, Bill, you're not experienced about riding a horse. You don't need to do that. And he just kept on and on. And Bill was real shy. Didn't like you to say much about it in front of the whole congregation. I was going on with this. And I said, we finally saw some horses, and they were just standing, and they were just kind of head to tail in a circle. And we saw them horses, and Bill said, well, what about those? Can we ride those horses? Me and Brenda Natoma didn't want to ride, but he wanted to ride. And so he got on the horse, and his foot got out of the stirrup. And as the horses started going, there was a loud music that started, and it seemed like the horses spooked, and Bill was caught with that foot out of the stirrup, and the other one, and I was talking about how that the horse was going round and round, and everybody in the church was looking, like, what in the world did you do? And I kind of let it go for a minute, and people was looking, well, what happened? What happened? And I said, well, finally the manager came out and unplugged it. And Bill was sitting back there about where Jerry's at. Sure good to see you, Jerry. And I said, Bill, are you here anywhere? He back there, and he pulled that hand up like this. Natoma was about to roll in the floor, laughing. And 2 people, and I'll not tell you who they are. They don't attend here. But 2 people still thought I was telling the truth about that. And after church, one of them called him. And another one stopped and seen him out and said, I don't think that was funny. He said he could have got really injured with them horses. I thought, man, you can't even tell a good joke unless somebody don't understand it. And Natoma said she got in the car, and I called them after church. And she said, I said, Bill, what did you think about that? That embarrassed you? And here's something else she used to always say. He'd say, I was ashamed. I was ashamed. And she said, when you said that, he just nearly slid down into the floor. And people was looking. And I think Brother Cantrell, ever since that, every time he saw Bill, he called him cowboy. Bill would mention that all the time, said, Kensel calls me cowboy because of them horses. But yet, I got to thinking about things like that. Boy, I just catch myself laughing yesterday and today in the midst of all that work over there. And you know what? In our lives, you can dwell on the things that you have no control over. You can dwell on those things, and if you're not careful, you'll start in the same shape David was when he said, how long? Instead of giving God praise and honor, he's challenging God by saying, Lord, how long are you going to forget me? And why would you even talk to somebody that forgot you? But he said, how long? And I look at this tonight and I see the sorrow. Some of the sorrows that we go through in life is when we feel like that we have completely been forgotten. Well, you know what? I'm glad that David actually understood. And Brother Joseph, he understood because there was a time that David was running from Saul, and he goes and hides himself in a cave, and he says, I looked to my right and I looked to my left. He said, there was no man that cared for my soul. But you know what he found? He found that God did care. Hey, let me say to you tonight that no matter what, God cares. What about these folks that we saw in North Carolina? And when we pulled up, and some of the preachers and some of those folks that we had seen, and they especially knew Brother Tim and Sister Shannon, and when they seen people that they knew, they appreciated everybody, but it made a difference when it was someone they knew and they were embracing. It wasn't just bringing items, but they were looking at it like this. These folks haven't forgotten us. They've not forgotten us, and we embraced them. We prayed with them. I'm telling you, we don't ever need to get to the place of our life that we think that God has isolated us and completely forgot about us. Well, the sorrow that we can have is that. And what we look at tonight is this. We see abandonment. Have you ever seen someone that was abandoned? I remember going to the nursing home at Rockwood. It's not called Rockwood Healthcare now, but the very first day that they had opened their facility, there was a black man that had been dropped off and sit outside. They never knew anything about the man. He was there all those years until he died. He had more visits than any person that ever lived in that nursing home, and yet he knew no one. Come to find out that his family, if I'm not mistaken, was from Morristown. When they heard about the facility, they dropped him off at the front of the building before that had ever opened up. They went outside, they found the man, they brought him in, he couldn't talk plain, and I forget his name now, but he always carried a little bitty guitar, and he'd strum on that guitar. If you went there and had services and preached, you always seemed to couldn't understand what he said. And when he died, they gave a funeral, and there were people, hundreds of people that had come. His family abandoned him for what reason, I don't know. Maybe there's something bad, I'm not sure. But I know that he had more friends than anyone there. And most people didn't know his name. Sometimes your family might abandon you. Satan, of course, he'll abandon you when he gets what he wants out of you. But my friend, God never will abandon you. He knows exactly where you are. But sometimes we feel that we've been abandoned. He seemed that God had forgotten him. Boy, what sorrow is that? Today is my next to the youngest grandson's birthday. Graham is 10 years old. I didn't get to see him before school. I called and he was, I think his mother had taken him to school. But I didn't get to talk to him. I called Darren a while ago and he was still at the base program. He loves going to the base program at school. And I said, well, bring him by after church. We got his birthday gift and his card, in which I don't have. You have to stop and get that on the way home. I went to Walmart and forgot it. I just felt like everybody forgot me, so I just forgot it. So anyway, we'll have it time he gets there. And it's his birthday, but you know what? He's probably had a good day. People's probably given him gifts and they've sung to him. But you know he's coming because he expects that Mama and Papa are going to give him a card and have a gift in it. Brenda's got something else to give him. And if he came by the house and we never mentioned his birthday and didn't have a card, you know what? He would have been very disappointed. Brother David, he'd been disappointed. Well, you know, have you ever felt in your life that you've been completely forgot about? But what about when you feel like God's forgot about you? How troubling that would be. But God hasn't forgot. And I begin to see in the text, and I'm not going to read any of the verses again because we've done that thoroughly, but I see that he seemed that God had forgotten him. That's why he questions, how long are you going to forget me? And then he felt like God had forsaken him. How long are you going to hide your face from me? That I can't even see your face. The sorrow of not seeing anyone, or not to see that recognized vision of God, had to be sorrowful. But not only in his sorrow did he seem to be abandoned, but I want you to see the sorrow and the abasement of it. Now, we know what the Scripture said. If a man exalts himself, he'll be abased. He'll be humbled. So when we look tonight, we see he was abandoned, but now he's abased. Here's a man that's made low. He's come to a place that he is so humbled. He's been brought so low because of the rejection and because of the darkness that God's hid his face. And he begins to talk to us, and he tells us about his feeling. He tells you exactly the way that he feels. When you look in verse number 2, and he begins to share the feeling that he has. He begins to say that it's my soul that I'm taking desperate need of. And he's telling us what his feeling is, but not only does he mention his feeling, he begins to mention the foe. He said, you've even let my enemy be exalted above me. That's one thing when your friends are exalted above you. But it's a terrible thing when you feel like the enemy is being lifted higher than what you are. So he, in this time of sorrow, he's sharing his feeling, but then he's talking about the foe. All of my enemies are lifted up higher than what I am. Now let's look at the supplication. When you're having sorrow in your life, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to shut off or shut down completely, or you're going to reach out to somebody that will listen to you. Well, I'm glad God's never turned a deaf ear to his children. And he doesn't tell his friends. He doesn't tell Facebook. He doesn't tell any type of social media. He talks to God. If you're having a bad time in your life, let me tell you, I'll tell you right now, you better leave Facebook alone because it'll destroy you. And if it don't, it'll help you to destroy somebody else. I have been through that this year. And sometimes you just have to say nothing and do nothing. And you know what? God, when he fights the battle, but if you've got yourself in a battle that you've done all by yourself, don't look for God to fight that one. Sometimes you're left alone to fight your way out from the trouble that you put yourself in. But if God ever permits you to be in a situation, you might as well trust him because he's going to bring you out. And I begin to see here his abasement. He's brought low. But then we see the supplication, the sorrow. But now the supplication, what does he do? He tells the Lord, he says in verse number 3, he said, I'm overwhelmed. Have you ever got overwhelmed? I was there last week. We had 3 days, 2 days that we were just taking up money and materials. And I was overwhelmed because I couldn't stay at the church and I wanted to be here. But we had people that were in the hospitals. We had people that were dying, and 2 that did. And every time I'd come here, I'd get called and go back out. And it was something all the time. And I know what it was, just to be overwhelmed. And get in late and you think, man, what's happening here? And Brenda trying to catch me up on it and just get overwhelmed. But I'm telling you something, when you get overwhelmed with emotions, if you're not careful, you'll let your emotions get the best of you. And if you do that, then you know what's going to happen? People's going to look at you, and they're not going to see God. They're going to see you. When you let your emotions get the best of you, you'll either get angry and you're going to blow it. You're going to get sad and you're going to isolate yourself. Or you're just going to shut everything off and you're going to start blaming God or blaming anyone that's not even responsible for your problems. And that's what happens. But in his type of supplication, he cries to the right person. He cries to God. And he begins to pour out his emotions. When you look in verse 3, without reading the whole verse, but he says, consider and hear me. He said, Lord, just consider my emotions and listen to what I have to say. Would you just lighten mine eyes? As he begins to cry out to the Lord. And then, of course, in verse 3, he said, lest I sleep the sleep of death. He said, if I keep going like I am right now, I'm drained. I'm drained, completely drained. And he said, I'm going to die if you don't do something. Not only in his type of supplication did he say, I'm overwhelmed with emotions, but he said, I'm overwhelmed by the enemy. When you look at verse 4, he said, you know what my enemy can say? He said, lest they say. And look at that. He said that they have prevailed against him. He said, the last thing that I want the enemy to be able to do is to look at me and say, we prevailed against him. Not over him, but we prevailed against him. That was just going to eat him up. And then we come to the last verses, verse 5 and verse number 6. After the sorrow and the time of supplication, he talks about the song. And this won't even have to read the verses again. But he's singing because of something that he knows has always worked in his life. He begins to sing in verse 5 of God's salvation. You're not going to heaven on your salvation. You're not going to win over trials on your salvation. You're not going to have victory in your salvation, but you can rejoice. You can be a victor through the salvation of God. That's why the psalmist David, even further in Psalms 30, after he's weeping for the night, joy comes in the morning. Psalms, or actually in Psalms 52, he begins to cry out to God, and he said, create in me a right spirit, a clean and a contrite spirit. And he said, Lord, would you restore the joy, now listen, of thy salvation. The joy of your salvation, it'll never last. But the joy of his salvation can continually be restored. What does that mean? Well, that simply means that you're not going to be happy every day or every moment of your life, even if you're saved, because you still live in the human flesh. There's still sin, there's disappointment, there's discouragement, But when you get your eyes upon Him, there's a opportunity that His salvation can be restored to joy in your life. So He says, restore to me the joy of thy salvation. He began to sing the song of God's salvation. But then verse number 6, as we end, come on to the music if you will. We'll give a verse of invitation. I will sing unto the Lord because. The Carver family sung a song years ago when Robin was still living. Robin and David are together in heaven now. And I used to play this on my radio program a lot. And the song was I Sing Because. How many remember hearing that song? Sing Because. We had it on cassette tape for many years. Don't know, we probably still have it somewhere. I sing because I have a hiding place. I sing because, and you don't want me to sing much more of it. But I sing because. David said, there's a reason that I sing. Through the sorrow and through the supplication, God has given me a song, and here's what He tells us. He said, I will sing unto the Lord because He hath dealt bountifully with me. He said, you know, the reason that I'm able to sing, he said, God deals with me different than the enemy does. God deals with me different than I deal with me. He said, God deals bountifully with me. And because of the way God deals with him, he said, I can sing. Stand together with me, would you?